The stagecoach wheels screeched to a halt, kicking up a cloud of dust so thick Ruby Dawson could barely see through the grimy window. Her hands trembled as they gripped her small valise. Fort McDowell, Arizona, 1883. 1,000 miles from Boston, a lifetime away from everything she'd ever known. And she was here to marry a complete stranger. But here's the twist you didn't see coming. Ruby wasn't running toward a new life. She was running from a monster. The driver yanked open the door. "Fort McDowell, miss. Last stop." Ruby hesitated, her fingers automatically moving to adjust her high collar. Beneath the fabric, yellowing bruises circled her neck like a grotesque necklace. Her stepfather's parting gift. Her cheek was swollen, her lip split. There was no hiding what had been done to her. She stepped into the blazing Arizona sun, and the heat slammed into her like a physical wall. This wasn't the cool New England spring she'd left behind. This was something savage, unforgiving. Ruby squinted at the small crowd gathered around the stagecoach, searching for the face of Clayton Keller, the cattle rancher who'd advertised for a bride, the man who'd paid for her passage after 3 months of careful correspondence. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, his face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Ruby could make out a strong jaw covered with stubble, a faded blue shirt under a leather vest, dusty trousers, worn boots, and a gun belt hanging low on his hips. "Miss Dawson." His voice was deep, touched with a slight drawl that made her name sound almost musical. Ruby nodded, suddenly unable to form words. He stepped closer, and she saw his eyes for the first time, piercing blue, the color of the summer sky back home. Then those eyes widened with shock as he took in her battered face. "What happened to you?" But before Ruby could answer, Clayton's entire expression changed. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists. And Ruby realized with a jolt of fear she'd seen that look before. It was anger. Raw, dangerous anger. Was she about to discover she'd traded one nightmare for another? Clayton reached out and Ruby flinched instinctively. But his touch, when it came, was impossibly gentle. He tilted her chin up, examining her injuries with eyes that had gone hard as flint. "Those aren't from any accident," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Those are from someone's fists." Ruby tried to pull away, humiliation burning through her. "Please, it doesn't matter now. I'm here." "It matters," Clayton interrupted, but his tone softened as his eyes met hers. "Those bruises you arrived with, those will be the last ones you ever have to bear. I promise you that, Miss Dawson." Ruby felt tears threatening. No one had ever made such a promise to her before. No one had ever looked at her with such protection, such fury on her behalf rather than directed at her. "I'm Clayton Keller," he continued, his voice steadying. "Welcome to Fort McDowell. My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. Are you ready to see your new home?" Ruby could only nod. Perhaps, she thought, perhaps the Arizona territory would offer something she'd never dared hope for. Safety. But as Clayton helped her into his wagon, she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. A shadow, a darkness that flickered and disappeared. What secrets was this man hiding? And had she really escaped danger, or simply traded one form for another? The first twist came before they'd even left the town square. "We should see Doc Miller before heading to the ranch," Clayton said as he climbed up beside her. "That's really not necessary," Ruby protested. "I insist." The firmness in Clayton's voice left no room for argument, and Ruby felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Men who insisted, men who didn't take no for an answer. She knew where that led. But here's what Ruby didn't expect. The doctor's office was clean, professional, welcoming. And when Dr. Miller examined her injuries, Clayton didn't stay to watch. He didn't hover or control or demand answers. "Perhaps Mr. Keller could wait outside," Ruby suggested softly. Of course. Clayton moved toward the door immediately. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Once alone with Dr. Miller, Ruby slowly removed her shawl and unbuttoned the top of her high-necked dress. The bruises extended across her collarbone, down her shoulders, across her back. A map of violence written on her skin. How did this happen, Miss Dawson? My stepfather. He wasn't pleased about my decision to come west. Dr. Miller's expression remained professional, but his eyes reflected deep concern as he applied salve to her visible injuries. These will heal in time. Any pain when you breathe? Dizziness? I'm stronger than I look, Doctor. I believe that. You'd have to be to travel all this way alone. But when Clayton returned and Dr. Miller delivered his assessment, she'll be fine. The bruises will fade in a week or two. Ruby noticed something strange. Clayton's jaw remained tight. His hands kept clenching and unclenching. This wasn't just concern. This was something deeper, something almost personal. What do I owe you, Doc? Clayton asked. Not a thing. Consider it a wedding gift. Wedding. The word hung in the air between them like a thundercloud. Ruby's breath caught. The reality crashed down upon her with the force of a runaway horse. She was expected to marry this stranger, this undeniably handsome but completely unknown man, possibly within days. At the general store, things got even stranger. Mrs. Bennet, the shopkeeper's wife, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity. Her eyes lingered on Ruby's bruises, but she tactfully said nothing, until Clayton dropped his bombshell. Miss Dawson has come to be my wife. Mrs. Bennet's eyebrows shot up. Well, that's wonderful news. We'd all given up hope of you ever settling down, Clay. As Mrs. Bennet helped Ruby select practical clothing for ranch life, sturdy skirts, work shirts, a riding coat, Ruby overheard fragments of whispered conversation between the older woman and Clayton. Those bruises happened before she got here, Clayton interrupted firmly, and won't be happening again. Ruby pretended not to hear, but his words sent warmth flooding through her chest. Perhaps this arrangement wouldn't be the cold transaction she had feared. Perhaps... But that's when Ruby noticed something that made her blood run cold. As Clayton paid for their purchases, his hand moved to his gun belt, adjusting it with the unconscious ease of someone very familiar with violence. And for just a moment, Ruby caught a glimpse of something on his wrist, a scar, thick and ropey, the kind that came from a blade or a burn. What had Clayton Keller survived? And more importantly, what had he done? The ride to the ranch took them through vast expanses of rugged terrain. Mountains rose in the distance like ancient sentinels. The landscape was beautiful, in a harsh, unforgiving way that reminded Ruby uncomfortably of survival itself. It's beautiful, she said softly. Different from anything I've seen before. Clayton glanced at her. It can be harsh, but there's something honest about it. The land doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. Ruby found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. His profile was strong, his gaze steady. There was a solidity to him that made her feel strangely safe, despite barely knowing him. Mr. Keller. Clayton, he corrected. Or Clay, if you prefer. Seems odd for my wife to call me Mr. Keller. I'm not your wife yet, Ruby pointed out. A slight smile tugged at his lips. Fair enough. What were you going to say? I wanted to thank you for your kindness today, and for not asking too many questions. Clayton's expression grew serious. There'll be time enough for questions. But I want you to know something, Ruby. Whatever happened before, whatever drove you to answer an advertisement from a stranger in a newspaper, it's in the past now. No one will hurt you here. The words should have comforted her. Instead, they raised a new question that Ruby couldn't shake. Why would a successful rancher, clearly not unpleasant to look at, Need to advertise for a bride at all? Ruby asked him directly, her boldness surprising even herself. Clayton's laugh was unexpected, deep and rich, transforming his serious face completely. Not unpleasant to look at. That might be the most lukewarm compliment I've ever received. But when his expression grew serious again, his answer chilled Ruby to her core. There aren't many unmarried women in these parts, and the ones who are here. He paused. Let's just say I wanted someone who didn't know about my past, someone who could see me for who I am now, not who I was. Who he was, what did that mean? Before Ruby could press further, they crested a hill, and she caught her first glimpse of the ranch. Her breath caught. This wasn't some small homestead. This was substantial. A sturdy two-story house built of stone and timber, a large barn, several outbuildings, corrals holding multiple horses. "This is all yours?" she asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Ours now," Clayton corrected, "if you decide to stay." Ruby turned to him, confused. "What do you mean? Of course I'm staying. The arrangement can be undone." Clayton's voice was firm. "I won't hold you to anything if you're not happy here, Ruby. I want a wife, not a prisoner." And that's when Ruby realized something that changed everything. Clayton Keller was offering her a choice, something she'd rarely been given in her entire life. But why? What was he hiding that made him so willing to let her walk away? A young boy of about 12 ran out to greet them as they pulled up to the house. "Mr. Clay, you're back!" He skidded to a stop when he saw Ruby. "Who's that?" "Daniel. This is Miss Ruby Dawson. Ruby, this is Daniel Martinez. He helps around the ranch." As Daniel ran off to prepare the guest room, not the master bedroom, Ruby looked questioningly at Clayton. "I meant what I said, Ruby. You're not obligated to marry me just because you've arrived. You'll have your own room, your own space. We'll take time to get to know each other. If after a while you decide this isn't what you want, I'll pay for your passage to wherever you want to go." Ruby was speechless. This was nothing like what she had expected, nothing like the cold business arrangement her stepfather had mocked her for accepting. "Why would you do that?" she finally asked. Clayton's expression was serious as he picked up her valise. "Because a marriage should be a partnership, not a purchase." But as he led her into the house, Ruby couldn't shake a growing suspicion. Men didn't offer women choices out of pure kindness, not in her experience. There had to be another reason. What was Clayton Keller so afraid she might discover? The interior of the ranch house delivered another shock. Ruby had expected something sparse and purely functional. Instead, she found comfortable furniture, bookshelves lined with actual books, colorful woven rugs brightening wooden floors. This was a home, not just a shelter. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "Rita's influence," Clayton admitted. "My housekeeper. You'll meet her shortly." Rita Mendez turned out to be a middle-aged Mexican woman with warm brown eyes that widened at the sight of Ruby's injuries. "Ay, pobrecita," she exclaimed. Clayton introduced them, then showed Ruby to the guest room upstairs, a pleasant space with a large bed, a dresser, a small writing desk, and a window overlooking the mountains. "The washroom is across the hall," Clayton explained. "There's indoor plumbing, a luxury out here, but worth every penny." After Clayton left her to get settled, Ruby sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything. The man she had traveled across the country to marry was nothing like she had imagined. She had prepared herself for someone crude, possibly harsh, someone she would have to learn to tolerate. Instead, she had found genuine kindness, respect, space to make her own choices. It was terrifying, because Ruby had learned long ago that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. And as she changed into fresh clothes and prepared for dinner, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. Some piece of the puzzle that would explain why a successful, attractive rancher would give a mail-order bride so much power to walk away. What was Clayton hiding? Dinner brought the first real clue. Rita had prepared an elaborate meal: tender beef in rich sauce, beans unlike any Ruby had tasted, warm tortillas, fresh bread, and a sweet custard for dessert. The food was delicious, but Ruby found herself watching the easy banter between Clayton and Rita. Years of comfortable familiarity showed in every interaction. After dinner, Clayton suggested they sit on the porch. The night was cool, stars blazing overhead in greater numbers than Ruby had ever seen. "It's so quiet," she whispered. "One of the things I love most about it here," Clayton said. "In town there's always some noise. Out here sometimes all you can hear is the wind." They sat in companionable silence, rocking gently in the porch chairs. Then Clayton spoke, his voice gentle but serious. "Will you tell me about the Bruises?" Ruby's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. She had known this conversation would come eventually. "My mother died when I was 15. My stepfather, he had always been strict, but after Mother died, he became cruel. He drank, and when he drank, he—" She trailed off. "He hit you," Clayton supplied, his voice carefully controlled. Ruby nodded. "When I saw your advertisement in the paper, I thought it was my chance to escape. He was furious when I told him, said no decent man would want me, that I'd end up with someone worse than him." She gave a humorless laugh. "The bruises I arrived with were a parting gift, to remind me of what would await me if I came crawling back." Clayton's knuckles were white where he gripped his chair. "You won't be going back." "No," Ruby agreed. "I won't." Clayton seemed to be struggling with something. Finally, he asked, Was there worse than the hitting?" Ruby understood what he was asking. "No, not that. He was cruel, but not in that way." Visible relief crossed Clayton's features. "Good, that's good." He paused. "I want you to know, Ruby, that I've never raised my hand to a woman. I never will." "I believe you," Ruby said softly, and was surprised to realize she meant it. But then Clayton started telling his own story, and Ruby felt her world tilt sideways once again. "I grew up in Texas. My father was a rancher there. I came out here after the war, looking for a fresh start." "You fought in the war?" Ruby asked carefully. "Confederate side," Clayton admitted, and Ruby's breath caught. "Not by choice. Texas seceded, and able-bodied men were expected to serve. I was 16 when I enlisted, too young to know better." "You were just a boy," Ruby said softly. "Old enough to carry a rifle," Clayton replied grimly. "Old enough to see things no one should see." He shook his head as if to dispel the memories. "After it ended, I couldn't stay in Texas. Too many ghosts. Worked my way west. Bought this land in '72. No family. Lost my mother when I was young, like you. Father passed during the war. Had a brother, older. Lost him at Gettysburg." Clayton's voice was matter-of-fact, but Ruby could hear the pain beneath. They were both orphans in their own way, both alone in the world, both running from ghosts. But here's what Ruby didn't realize yet. Some ghosts don't stay buried. That night, the nightmares came. Ruby woke with a strangled cry, disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness. For a terrifying moment, she thought she was back in Boston, that her escape had been the dream. Then she remembered. Arizona. Clayton Keller's ranch. Safety. A soft knock came at her door. "Ruby, are you all right?" Clayton's voice was low, concerned. Ruby swallowed hard. "Yes, I'm sorry if I disturbed you. May I come in?" Ruby hesitated, then wrapped her shawl around her nightdress. "Yes." The door opened slowly. Clayton stood there in trousers and an undershirt, his hair tousled from sleep, carrying a lamp. Nightmare. Ruby nodded, embarrassed. I didn't mean to wake you. I'm a light sleeper. Clayton remained in the doorway, respectfully not entering further without invitation. Can I get you anything? Water? Rita makes a tea that helps with sleep. No, thank you. I'll be fine. Clayton hesitated. Would you like me to stay until you fall asleep? Just sitting in the chair there, he added hastily, pointing to the rocking chair by the window. Ruby was about to refuse, but something in his expression stopped her. There was no pity there, only genuine concern and perhaps recognition of a shared pain. Yes, she said softly. I think I'd like that. Clayton moved to the chair, setting the lamp on the small table. Try to sleep. I'll be right here. As Ruby lay back down, listening to the gentle creak of the rocking chair, Clayton began to speak quietly. My brother had nightmares too, after his first battle. He'd wake up shouting, thinking he was still on the battlefield. What did you do? Ruby asked. Sat with him like this. Sometimes told stories about when we were boys. Anything to pull his mind back to the present. Did it help? Sometimes. Not always. But he said knowing someone was there made it easier to fall back asleep. Ruby felt herself drifting, comforted by Clayton's presence. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when she heard him rise quietly from the chair. Half asleep, she felt him gently adjust the quilt over her shoulders. Sleep well, Ruby, he whispered. For the first time in years, Ruby slept without further nightmares. But the peace wouldn't last, because the next morning would bring a revelation that would change everything Ruby thought she knew about Clayton Keller. Morning came with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Ruby dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, where Clayton was already seated at the kitchen table. Good morning, he greeted her, rising slightly. Did you sleep well after? Yes, thank you. Better than I have in quite some time. Over breakfast, hearty eggs, bacon, beans, and fresh tortillas, Clayton outlined his plan for the day. I thought I'd show you around the ranch, introduce you to everyone, unless you'd prefer to rest after your journey. I'd like to see everything, Ruby assured him. The ranch was larger than Ruby had initially realized. As they walked, Clayton explained the operations with clear pride. I've got about 500 head of cattle now. Started with just 50. Breed them and drive them to the railroad at Tucson twice a year. It's impressive, Ruby said sincerely. You've built something substantial here. They approached the corral where several cowboys were working with horses. The men stopped when they noticed Clayton and Ruby approaching. Boys, this is Miss Ruby Dawson, Clayton announced. Ruby, these are my ranch hands. He introduced them one by one. Miguel, Rita's husband and his foreman. Brothers Jake and Thomas Wilson, an older man everyone called Pops, and a young half-Apache man named Samuel. Each man tipped his hat respectfully, though Ruby noticed their curious glances at her fading bruises. Miss Dawson has come from Boston to be my wife, Clayton continued, his tone matter-of-fact, but with an undercurrent that suggested no questions would be welcomed about her appearance. But then came the moment that changed everything. As they were leaving the corral, young Samuel called out hesitantly, Mr. Keller, sir. Clayton turned back. Just wanted to say. Samuel paused, clearly nervous. I know what it's like to need a second chance, to have someone believe you're not defined by your past. Thank you for that. And welcome, Miss Dawson. Mr. Keller's a good man, better than most know. Clayton nodded curtly, but Ruby saw his jaw tighten. As they walked away, she pressed carefully. What did he mean? A second chance? Clayton's silence stretched out so long Ruby thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, his voice low. Samuel was 16 when I found him. He'd been accused of stealing horses from a ranch about 20 miles north. The rancher wanted to hang him without a trial. I intervened. Did he do it? Steal the horses? Yes. Clayton's answer was blunt. He was starving, trying to trade the horses for food for his mother and sister. The rancher had refused to pay him wages he'd earned, called him a dirty half-breed, and ran him off the property. Ruby absorbed this. So you hired him. I gave him what everyone deserves, a chance to prove himself. He's been with me 3 years now, best horse handler I've ever seen. It was a good story, a noble story. But something in Clayton's tone made Ruby wonder, was he talking about Samuel, or himself? What second chance did you need, Clayton? She asked quietly. Clayton stopped walking. He stood perfectly still for a long moment, his back to her, his shoulders tense. When he finally turned, his face was carefully blank. We should head back. Rita will have lunch ready soon. He was shutting down, closing off. And Ruby realized with sudden clarity, whatever secret Clayton was keeping, it was big enough that he'd rather end the conversation than risk revealing it. But secrets have a way of coming to light. And Ruby's questions were about to be answered in the most unexpected way possible. That afternoon, as Ruby worked with Rita in the garden, a rider approached the ranch house at full gallop. Even from a distance, Ruby could see the urgency in his posture. Clayton emerged from the barn, his hand automatically moving to his gun belt. The rider, a young man Ruby didn't recognize, slowed his horse, breathing hard. Clay Keller. What's wrong, Tom? It's the Dawson gang. They hit the bank in Prescott 3 days ago. Sheriff's forming a posse. Ruby's blood turned to ice. Dawson, her name. But that was impossible. Her stepfather was back in Boston, wasn't he? I'm a rancher now, Tom, not a lawman. But Clay, you know them better than anyone. You rode with... That was a long time ago. Clayton's voice was sharp, cutting. Tell the sheriff I'm not available. The young man looked disappointed but nodded. As he turned to leave, his eyes fell on Ruby for the first time. His face went pale. Miss, are you... Do you know there's a man in town looking for a woman matching your description? Says his stepdaughter ran away, might be dangerous. Says she stole money from him and... She stole nothing. Clayton's voice was cold as winter ice. And the man you're describing is a drunk and a liar. If he comes to my ranch, he'll regret it. Tom nodded quickly and rode off, leaving Ruby standing frozen in the garden, her world crumbling around her. Clayton had ridden with an outlaw gang. Her stepfather had followed her to Arizona. And the safe haven she thought she'd found was about to become a battleground. Ruby dropped the basket of vegetables she'd been holding. Clayton. Inside. Now. His voice brooked no argument. In the parlor, Clayton closed the door firmly. When he turned to face Ruby, she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not just protectiveness, but something harder, something dangerous. Your stepfather is here, in Fort McDowell. I heard. Clayton, I didn't steal anything from him. He's lying. I know he's lying. Clayton moved closer, taking her hands in his. Ruby, I need you to listen carefully. Your stepfather is claiming you're mentally unstable, that you stole money and valuables. He's got legal papers, probably forged, but they'll look legitimate enough to cause trouble. He's telling everyone who'll listen that he's here to take you home for your own good. Ruby felt the room spinning. He'll never let me go. He'll drag me back to Boston. No, he won't. Clayton's voice was absolute. Because in 2 days, you and I are getting married. Once you're my wife, he has no legal claim on you whatsoever. 2 days, but we were going to wait 2 weeks. Plans have changed. Clayton's jaw was set in a hard line. We ride into town tomorrow, speak to Reverend Phillips, and get married the day after, before your stepfather can get any legal intervention. Ruby pulled her hands free, panic rising. You said I had a choice. You promised I wouldn't be a prisoner. And you're not. Clayton's expression softened slightly. Ruby, I'm not forcing you. If you truly want to leave, I'll help you get away before he finds you. I'll put you on a train west, give you enough money to start over in California or Oregon. But if you stay, if you marry me, I can protect you legally. Your stepfather can't touch you. Why? Ruby demanded, her voice breaking. Why would you do this? You barely know me. And you rode with outlaws. Tom said, yes. Clayton's admission was quiet but firm. When I was 19, desperate, angry at the world after the war, I made terrible choices. I rode with bad men for almost 2 years, but I never killed anyone who didn't deserve it, never stole from anyone who couldn't afford the loss. And when I realized what I was becoming, I walked away. I came here, built this ranch from nothing, and I've spent the last 8 years trying to make amends. He met her eyes directly. I know what it's like to be running, Ruby, to be desperate for a second chance. That's why I'll help you whether you marry me or not. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope you'd stay. Ruby stared at him, her mind racing. An outlaw past, her stepfather hunting her. A rushed wedding. Everything was spiraling out of control. But beneath the panic, a strange calm was settling over her. Because Ruby realized something crucial. Clayton wasn't hiding his past to deceive her. He was ashamed of it. And shame meant conscience. Conscience meant he wasn't like her stepfather at all. I'll marry you, she said quietly. Not because I'm trapped, but because I choose to. Because I believe you're the man you are now, not the man you were then. Clayton's relief was palpable. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he drew her into his arms, holding her gently. Those bruises you arrived with will be the last, he murmured into her hair. I promise you that, and I'm going to keep that promise, even if it means facing down your stepfather myself. But neither of them realized just how soon that confrontation would come, or how dangerous it would be. Because Ruby's stepfather wasn't just angry, he was desperate, and desperate men are capable of terrible things. The next morning dawned gray and threatening, storm clouds gathering over the mountains. Clayton, Ruby, and Miguel rode into Fort McDowell together, Clayton insisting on the foreman's presence as both witness and backup. Stay close to me, Clayton told Ruby as they approached the town. Don't talk to anyone I don't know. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understand? Ruby nodded, her stomach churning with anxiety. Reverend Phillips was initially confused by their urgency, but agreed to perform the ceremony the following morning after Clayton explained, in carefully edited terms, about Ruby's stepfather's arrival and false accusations. The Lord's timing is often unexpected, the Reverend said kindly. I'll see you both tomorrow at 9 o'clock. They were leaving the church when Ruby saw him, her stepfather, standing outside the saloon, looking older and meaner than she remembered, a cruel smile spreading across his face as his eyes locked onto hers. Ruby. His voice carried across the street. There you are, girl. Time to come home. Clayton stepped in front of Ruby, his hand resting on his gun. She's not going anywhere with you. And who are you? Her stepfather, Ruby couldn't even think his name without feeling sick, took a step forward. Some cowboy thinking he can steal another man's daughter. Stepdaughter, Clayton corrected coldly. And she's 20 years old, legally an adult. She doesn't need your permission to be here. But she does need to answer for theft. Her stepfather pulled papers from his coat. I've got legal documents here stating she stole over $200 and several valuable items before fleeing Boston. The sheriff's already agreed to hold her until this gets sorted out. Those are lies, Ruby said, finding her voice. I never stole anything. Then you won't mind being held while we investigate, will you? Her stepfather's smile was predatory. Sheriff McKen is an old friend. We served together in the war. He's inclined to help a fellow veteran. Clayton's voice dropped to something dangerous. You're not taking her anywhere. That's so. Her stepfather's hand moved toward his own gun. You going to shoot me in front of all these witnesses, Cowboy? The street had gone quiet. People were watching from doorways and windows. Ruby realized with growing horror that her stepfather had planned this perfectly. A public confrontation where Clayton couldn't act without looking like a criminal. But then Sheriff Mackin emerged from his office, and Ruby felt her last hope dying. That's enough, Keller, the sheriff said, his hand on his own weapon. Mr. Dawson here has legitimate concerns. I'm going to have to ask Miss Dawson to come with me until we sort this out. No. Clayton's voice was absolute. You're not touching her. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Clay. I know about your past. I've turned a blind eye because you've been a good citizen since you came here. But if you interfere with the law now, I'll have no choice but to arrest you too. Ruby's mind was racing. She could see the trap closing around them. If Clayton resisted, he'd be arrested, maybe imprisoned. If he stood aside, she'd be taken into custody, and her stepfather would find a way to drag her back to Boston, legal papers or not. There had to be another way. There had to be. Actually, Sheriff, you don't have any legal authority over Miss Dawson. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. Mrs. Bennett was standing in front of her store, hands on her hips, looking thoroughly unimpressed with the sheriff. Martha, stay out of this, the sheriff warned. I will not. Miss Dawson is engaged to marry Clayton Keller tomorrow morning, which means she's under his protection and household. You can't arrest her for alleged crimes without filing proper charges, which you haven't done. And Mr. Dawson here, she turned a withering glare on Ruby's stepfather, has no legal authority to demand anything from an adult woman who isn't his blood relative. She stole from me. So you claim. But where's your proof? Where's your evidence? All I see is a man making accusations against a young woman with bruises on her face when she arrived. Mrs. Bennett's voice rang out across the street. Bruises you gave her, I'm guessing. A murmur ran through the growing crowd. Ruby saw several women nodding, their expressions sympathetic. Her stepfather's face turned red. You don't know what you're talking about, you old... I know what everyone in this town knows, Mrs. Bennett interrupted. Clayton Keller's a good man who's been nothing but honest and hard-working since he arrived 8 years ago. And you're a drunk and a bully who followed a young woman across the country because she had the courage to escape you. Martha's right, another voice called out. Mr. Bennett had emerged from the store. I don't see any reason to arrest Miss Dawson. If Dawson here has a legitimate claim, he can file it properly and wait for a judge like everyone else. Other townspeople began speaking up, voicing support for Clayton and Ruby. The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between his old friend and the town's opinion. Ruby's stepfather, seeing the tide turning against him, made a fatal mistake. Fine, he snarled, pulling his gun. I don't need the law. I'll take what's mine. He didn't finish the sentence. Clayton moved with lightning speed, his own gun clearing leather and firing before Ruby even registered what was happening. Her stepfather's gun went spinning from his hand, a bloodied scratch across his knuckles. The street went dead silent. Clayton kept his gun trained on her stepfather, his voice cold as death. The next bullet goes through your heart. Ruby's not yours. She never was. And if you ever come near her again, I'll kill you. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Sheriff Mackin stepped forward carefully. Dawson, I think it's time you left Fort McDowell. If I see you in this town again, I'll arrest you for disturbing the peace. Ruby's stepfather clutched his bleeding hand, hatred burning in his eyes as he looked at Ruby. You'll regret this, girl. You'll see what kind of man you've really chosen. I already know, Ruby said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. He's 10 times the man you'll ever be. Her stepfather spat on the ground, then turned and walked toward his horse, muttering threats under his breath. They watched him ride out of town, and Ruby felt as if a weight she'd been carrying for years finally lifted from her shoulders. Clayton holstered his gun and turned to her. "Are you all right?" Ruby realized she was shaking, but not from fear, from relief, from the sudden, overwhelming realization that she was truly free. "I'm fine. Clayton, thank you doesn't seem like enough." "You don't need to thank me." Clayton took her hand gently. "I told you those bruises would be the last. I meant it." Mrs. Bennet bustled over, patting Ruby's shoulder. "You'll both be at the church tomorrow morning, yes?" "Yes, ma'am," Clayton confirmed. "Good. I'll spread the word. The whole town will want to celebrate." Mrs. Bennet smiled at Ruby. "Welcome to Fort McDowell, dear. You've got family here now." As they rode back to the ranch, Ruby felt something she'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she was safe. Not just physically protected, but truly, deeply safe in a way that went beyond walls or guns. Clayton had risked everything for her. His reputation, his freedom, potentially his life. And he'd done it without hesitation. "Clayton," she said as the ranch came into view, "I don't want to wait until tomorrow." He looked at her surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't want a wedding with the whole town watching, feeling like we're only doing this because we have to. I want to marry you because I choose you. Just you, not circumstances or timing or anyone else." Clayton slowed his horse, studying her face. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." A slow smile spread across his face, the kind that made him look younger, lighter. "Then we'll speak to Reverend Phillips tonight. Ask if he'll do a private ceremony. Just you, me, and 2 witnesses." And that's exactly what they did. The private ceremony took place that evening in the small church, with only Reverend Phillips, Miguel, and Rita present. Ruby wore a simple dress, held a handful of wildflowers Rita had gathered. Clayton wore his best shirt, his hair still damp from where he'd washed away the day's dust. The vows were traditional, but when Clayton slipped a simple gold band onto Ruby's finger and promised to cherish and protect her for all his days, she felt the weight of his sincerity. When it was her turn, Ruby looked into his blue eyes and made her own promise. "I came here looking for escape. I found so much more. I found a partner, a protector, and a future I never dreamed possible. I promise to stand beside you, to trust you, to build something beautiful with you." "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Phillips declared. "Mr. Keller, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender and full of promise. When they finally parted, Ruby saw tears shining in Rita's eyes, and even Miguel looked suspiciously emotional. "Welcome to the family, mija," Rita said, embracing Ruby warmly. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, the tension of the past days finally releasing. Clayton helped Ruby down from the wagon, then surprised her by lifting her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained, carrying her across the threshold. "Can't skip the important parts." Inside, they found wine and candles waiting, Rita's doing, undoubtedly. Clayton poured 2 glasses, then raised his in a toast. "To new beginnings, to leaving the past behind. To us." "To us," Ruby echoed. As they climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, their bedroom now, Ruby felt nervous anticipation mixed with trust. Clayton had been patient, gentle, respectful. She had no reason to fear this next step. In the privacy of their room, Clayton took his time, his touches reverent, his words soft. "We'll take this as slowly as you need. If you want to stop—" "I don't want to stop," Ruby interrupted. "I want this. I want you." What followed was a revelation. Clayton's touch was nothing like the violence Ruby had known. It was gentle, patient, focused entirely on her comfort and pleasure. There was some discomfort, as she'd been told to expect, but it was brief and overshadowed by the growing warmth, the sense of connection, the surprising pleasure that built and built until Ruby understood for the first time what intimacy truly meant. Afterward, lying in Clayton's arms, her head resting on his chest as he stroked her hair, Ruby felt a contentment she'd never known. "Are you all right?" Clayton asked softly. "More than all right. I never knew it could be like that." Clayton pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "It gets better as we learn each other." Ruby traced patterns on his chest, marveling at the intimacy they now shared. "Thank you for being the man you are. Thank you for giving me a reason to be better than I was." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time in years, neither had nightmares. But the story doesn't end there, because the best part was still to come. 3 months passed in a blur of happiness. Ruby settled into ranch life, working alongside Rita, learning to ride like a true ranch woman, finding her place in the community. The women of Fort McDowell welcomed her warmly, and Ruby discovered friendships she'd never known in Boston. Clayton was everything a husband should be: respectful, affectionate, hard-working. They built a partnership based on trust and growing love. And at night their passion deepened, their connection strengthened. Then came the morning Ruby woke feeling inexplicably nauseated. She barely made it to the washroom before losing the contents of her stomach. Rita found her there, pale and shaking. "Mija, how long has this been happening?" "Just this morning. I think perhaps I ate something." "When was your last monthly cycle?" Ruby froze, counting backward. I don't remember. Maybe 6 weeks, 7?" Rita's face broke into a huge smile. "Mija, I think you are pregnant." The word hit Ruby like a thunderbolt. Pregnant. A baby. Clayton's baby. Their baby. Dr. Miller confirmed it that afternoon when Rita insisted they ride into town. Ruby was indeed expecting, due to arrive in approximately 6 months. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ruby took Clayton's hand. "Clayton, I have something to tell you." He turned to her, concerned immediately crossing his features. "Is everything all right?" Ruby nodded, tears of joy filling her eyes. "Everything is perfect. Clayton, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a long moment, Clayton simply stared at her, shock and wonder warring on his face. Then he let out a whoop of joy that startled nearby horses, dropped to his knees, and wrapped his arms around her waist. "A baby. Our baby." He pressed his face gently against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your pa can't wait to meet you." Ruby laughed, tears streaming down her face. This man, who had started as a stranger in an advertisement, had become her protector, her husband, and would now be the father of her child. "I love you, Ruby Keller," Clayton said, looking up at her with shining eyes. "I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but I do. I love you with everything I am." "I love you too," Ruby whispered. "I think I have almost from the beginning." The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Clayton grew increasingly protective, too protective sometimes to Ruby's amused exasperation. But she understood the fear behind it. They'd both lost so much. This baby represented hope, future, family. When Ruby went into labor during a rare spring snowstorm, Clayton refused to leave her side despite the midwife's insistence that men usually waited elsewhere. He held her hand through every contraction, wiped her brow, whispered encouragement. "You're doing so well, so strong, my brave Ruby." And when their son finally entered the world with a thin, indignant wail, Clayton's face was a study in wonder. "Look what we made," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Look at our son." They named him Matthew Thomas Keller, after Clayton's brother and Ruby's father. A bridge between their pasts and their future. In the days and weeks that followed, Ruby watched Clayton transform into a devoted father. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor when Matthew was fussy, gazed in awe as Ruby nursed their child. "I never knew I could love someone so much," he confessed one evening. "Both of you. It's overwhelming sometimes." Ruby understood exactly what he meant. The love she felt for her husband and son was so vast it sometimes took her breath away. "We've come a long way from that day at the stagecoach," she said softly. Clayton nodded, taking her hand. "When you stepped down with those bruises on your face, I wanted to find whoever had hurt you and make them pay. I never imagined then that you would become everything to me." "And I never imagined I could be this happy," Ruby admitted. "I came here looking for safety. I found so much more." As spring blossomed into summer and Matthew grew strong and curious, Ruby reflected on her journey. From a frightened young woman with bruises on her face to a confident wife and mother, beloved by a good man, secure in her home and her future. The nightmares had faded completely, replaced by dreams of the future. More children, watching Matthew grow, growing old with Clayton by her side. On the one-year anniversary of Ruby's arrival in Fort McDowell, Clayton surprised her with a delicate gold locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of Matthew and a lock of his dark baby hair. "Perfect," Clayton murmured as he fastened it around her neck. "Like you." That night, after Matthew was asleep, they celebrated their anniversary in the privacy of their bedroom, their passion undiminished by the passing of time or the responsibilities of parenthood. Later, lying contentedly in each other's arms, Ruby reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "What are you thinking about?" Clayton asked. "About beginnings. About how the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures if we're brave enough to take the chance." Clayton pulled her closer. "I thank God every day that you were brave enough to come west, to trust a stranger with your future. And I thank God you were the man you are, the man who promised those bruises would be my last, and kept that promise in ways I never could have imagined." Outside, a coyote howled at the rising moon. The sounds of the Arizona night, once so foreign to Ruby, now formed the backdrop of her life. Her real life, her happy life. As Ruby drifted towards sleep in the safety of Clayton's arms, she knew with absolute certainty that the bruises of her past had faded completely, replaced by the indelible marks of love, trust, and belonging. The mail-order bride who had arrived with bruises had found not just safety, but joy. A joy that would sustain her through all the years to come. 3 years later, Ruby stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. Matthew, now a sturdy 3-year-old, played at her feet while she rocked their daughter, 6-month-old Emma, in her arms. Clayton emerged from the barn, his shirt dusty from a day's work, and his face broke into a huge smile at the sight of his family. He swept Matthew up into his arms, making the boy giggle, then kissed both Ruby and baby Emma. "Perfect," he murmured. "This moment is perfect." Ruby leaned into his embrace, feeling the absolute rightness of it all. The ranch had prospered. The town had embraced them completely. And the family they'd built together was more than she'd ever dared dream possible. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked Clayton. "Back when you placed that advertisement." "I hoped," he admitted, "but I never imagined it could be this good." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Ruby reflected on the full circle of her journey, from bruises to healing, from fear to trust, from desperation to abundant love. "Clayton?" "Yes, love. Thank you for everything, for keeping your promise, for being the man you are." He kissed her temple gently. "Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on a stranger, for seeing past my mistakes to the man I wanted to be." Matthew tugged on his father's leg. "Papa, can we see the horses?" Clayton laughed, setting the boy down. "Tomorrow, son. Tomorrow I'll teach you to ride." As they went inside for dinner, Rita had outdone herself again. Ruby paused at the threshold, looking back at the vast Arizona landscape that had become her home. She touched the locket around her neck, feeling the weight of all it represented. Family, safety, love, the future she'd built from the ashes of her past. The mail-order bride who arrived with Bruises had become a wife, a mother, a partner in building something lasting and beautiful. Those bruises had faded years ago, but the strength they'd forged in her remained. And as Ruby crossed the threshold into the warmth and light of her home, surrounded by the laughter of her children and the steady presence of her husband, she knew with absolute certainty she had made the right choice, the brave choice, the choice that had led her here, to this moment, to this life, to this love, the kind of love that erases old scars and writes new stories, the kind of love worth traveling 1,000 miles to find. If you enjoyed Ruby and Clayton's journey from bruises to healing, from stranger to soulmate, from desperation to abundant joy, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what moment made you cry. Because this story proves that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust someone new with our broken pieces. And sometimes, just sometimes, they help us build something even more beautiful than what we lost. Subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and love that conquers all.